wala quwwata illa billah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi taala wabarakatuh. Yang berhormat Datuk Saifuddin Abdullah, Professor Tamim, Professor Kamal, brothers and sisters. I am indeed very honored to be invited again by virtue, I don't know what, not an expert certainly, but I am very delighted to share some of my thoughts on the topic, although I'm not a social scientist. But the idea of colonization brings me back 10 years ago when we had our first seminar in Penang. Then it was officiated by no other than the Yang Berhormat Datuk Saifuddin, then was the Deputy Minister of Education, if I'm not mistaken. So it brings back memories of what decolonization is all about. And in fact, I learned about decolonization a lot more from that seminar. Before beginning, I would want to quote Datuk Saifuddin in his opening remark, and this is put in a book on page 5, I think. And he said, so how we look at meaning, how we can measure meaning, depend on our worldview and the whole issue of definition of knowledge that I was trying to address. So I think this is what the seminar is all about. How do you find new meaning? How do you find new arrivals given the things that's happening to us? Now, from my point of view, I am not going to talk about social science per se. I'm going to take one idea that has been bugging me for a long time, and this is something that has to do with what we are going around in the country today. I think a couple of days ago, I'm fortunate enough to share the same sort of platform with Datuk Saifuddin in discussing digital economy and the 4IR. Now, this word 4IR has been bugging me a lot recently, and I would want to share that concern with you because I can feel that this could be another form of decolonization if you are not careful. IR and also artificial intelligence probably is part of science and also to a certain extent part of social science, depending on how you look at it. Now, what is my concern as far as this is concerned? One is to see what is AI in the long term. I think Prof. Fauzan can correct me if I'm wrong. I know of 3 dimensions when you talk about IR. One is about adapting, in other words, taking whatever that is given by the computer that mimics our behavior, that mimics our thinking. That's probably the lower side of artificial intelligence. We have moved into what we call machine learning. That's basically looking at prediction, making reasons, and ability of the machine somehow rather to prompt us things of what we are doing. But again, then I think we have shifted into what we call the deep learning. We're actually the machines or the computer itself provide ideas, provide solution to problems. I think these are the big trends that is going on. I think most of us are not quite aware of what we are doing and where are we taking ourselves into. And I remember my early discussion with the late Professor Malik Badri, when we talk about the next lizard hole, which to my mind could be the technology if we are not mindful or know where we are heading. This will eventually go into what we call robotics. Human-like robots, and that's a picture of you take off the skin from the robots, you will see that is what. And I think we are trying to mimic as much as possible how do a robot behave as like a human being. That is not as scary as what I call the robot-like humans, and this is something I think that has not been talked about in many aspects. This is where the human being themselves try to behave like a robot by embedding as much as technology within himself. Could be the brain, could be the heart, could be any part of the body, so that he or she becomes a kind of a cyborg and therefore starting to behave like a robot. These are eventualities that I think we will see at the end of the day if you are not careful or we don't understand very much what technology is all about, particularly information technology and the rest of it. So as we talk about the 4IR, what bugs me is basically where do we place all this in our discussion? So far, I think we have got 2 council meetings. This discussion has not somehow or rather come out. We also talk about the confines of economics, not the robot-like humans or the human-like robots, as it were, in this particular context. Now, this robot-like humans is said to be manifested perhaps no more than 20 years from now in the 2050, according to some prediction. And that's about just 2 decades away. And until and unless we understand where we are heading, this could serve a problem for us. And this goes back to this very central idea of what algorithm is all about. An algorithm, I think you know, is a set of rules that gives you an input and bring an output. I think it is as complicated as can be, the one that I'm trying to demonstrate on the left side. But at the end of the day, what is more bothering for me is algorithm can be biased if trained on a biased data. Hence, we talk about big data and the rest of it, and we do not know what is the worth of this data, who verifies this data, whether it will be on our side or it will be on the other side. And these are research that have been taken by University of Helsinki. When we talk about algorithm and the data that you're dealing with, it depends on who writes the algorithm, what sort of data input that you use, and what sort of data output you will get. That will determine at the end of the day what sort of human person we will be. And that could be, quote unquote, one way of putting colonization in a new, very subtle way into the world that is not, amicable to those people who write the algorithm. Now, there are a number of examples that I can give you, but let's look at this paper that was written by Shakir, who is now working with a company called DeepMind. And he talked about decolonial theory as a social technical foresight in artificial intelligence. I happened to access this particular paper, which is difficult to read, but very, very insightful if you go and try to make a sense out of it. I'll pick a paragraph from this. He said the ongoing advances in artificial intelligence among the technological advances will reshape modern society and its cultural relationship, while the design and deployment of the system, let me get rid of this first, continually adapt holds a promise of far-reaching positive change. They simultaneously pose significant risks, especially to already vulnerable people, and that's people like us in the third world mainly. Values and power are central to this discussion. Where have we gone when we talk about IR, when we talk about all this new technology? What is the vulnerability? What is the risk that we are going to face is something that I think we have underestimated in many of our discussion. And he goes on by saying, the years ahead will usher a new wave of scientific breakthrough and technologies driven by AI research, making it incumbent upon AI communities to strengthen social contract to ethical foresight and the multiplicity of intellectual perspective available to us, ultimately supporting future technologies that enable greater well-being with the goal of beneficence and justice for all. So it depends on how you actually understand this. Where does it bring us in the context of artificial intelligence, algorithm, and the rest of it? But as what we can see today, just reading by the headlines, you begin to see that it is not all rosy. This is an article taken just last year. A biased medical algorithm favored white people for healthcare programs in the United States of America, where the blacks, where the colored are marginalized because of the kind of algorithm written by a certain group of people, in this case, the whites. It's biased to them, and therefore, indirectly, sometimes unintentionally marginalize people who do not belong to that thought process or do not belong to that cultural values, and so on and so forth. And certainly, Malaysians and Muslims who are not white will probably be disadvantaged, not only the blacks, as it were. There's also then this is from another university, I think California, which talks about bias algorithm exacerbate racial inequality in healthcare. Again, as we talk about Black Lives Matters and all the things that we are seeing unfolding now, including the use of vaccine, the distribution of vaccine, the whole idea of vaccine nationalism, appetite, and so on and so forth, this will have a direct implication to us if we don't understand what artificial is all about, what technology is all about, and where we actually are inherently disadvantaged because of the kind of algorithm that we use, because of the kind of science that we adopt, and it puts us in a state where we actually become more vulnerable than the people. So the discussion that we hear today on vaccines, whether it is true or not, we are not sure, but certainly given this kinds of biasness, given these kinds of issues that is talked about maybe at the intellectual level rather than the scientific level, rather than the level of the general public, will make us very much aware of where we are heading and how we need to mend some of these issues. Now, it is not only the question of healthcare, but also the question of the human being themselves. Last year, International Women's Year, how can algorithm be sexist? Yeah. And it says here, two centuries from the example of algorithm have the ability to push us back decades in gender parity, explained this particular researcher from University of College Dublin, who is part of a project to prevent artificial intelligence algorithm from learning gender bias. So we talk about racial bias, there's also gender bias now coming in. And they can exacerbate toxic masculinity and the attitude we have been fighting for decades in society. So what we have earned in terms of equality, in terms of justice, in terms of equity, what have you, could be overturned almost overnight if the algorithm that we are subjected to perhaps advocate a different kind of thinking, knowingly or unknowingly, purposefully or otherwise. And that could be another route of a colonialism coming in a very subtle way, where we look at technology as a savior for the future. It may not be indeed in this particular context, right? So this one I'm not too sure, but I do read some of the article which says bias in machine-supported decision cannot be eliminated. It is almost inherent in that. It's almost, to me, like the education system, where you have a system that's already inbuilt with it. The whole works of colonialism, our mind became polluted by it, although we're independent physically or national-wise, but in our mind, we still carry the flag of the national colonial masters within our head. And in that sense, I think it cannot be eliminated. And as we move and work more with technology and almost part and parcel of our life, then it becomes part and parcel our living standards and also our thinking. So those are the few things that begins to bug me when we talk about colonialism in a very different form. No more the hard power, but of course the soft power that our young children are being exposed without them knowing what is the real truth as far as technology is concerned. So I will summarize with a few works that has been taken. These as early as last year. Researchers say popular depiction of intelligent machines are mainly white. They argue people of color are being erased from the depiction of the future, and certainly that includes us and the Muslim Ummah in general. The team say this needs to be challenged. It is where the decolonization part comes in, whether it's Islamization or otherwise, so that we could create a more balanced, a more just society. And I'm not sure whether we are ready for this at this moment in time. Most depictions were white. The team of researchers found, saying that this risk create a racially homogeneous workforce of technologists building machines with an inbuilt bias. And this inbuilt bias is the one that people like us or people like me who are not well versed in technology will have to pay the price. Perhaps Fauzan can enlighten us a little bit on this. Last but not least, the whiteness of artificial intelligence, because it comes from the West. We talk about Western dominance. Now the whiteness becomes more I think dangerous in a way after Donald Trump and his team remove people of color from the way humanity thinks about its technology enhanced future, they argued. University of Cambridge expert suggests current portrayal of stereotypes about AI race create a racially homogeneous workforce of expiring technologies, creating machines with bias baked into their algorithm. The scientists say cultural depiction of AI as white need to be challenged. And I want to underline this, and I hope this is what the seminar is all about. How do you challenge this? How do you argue this? And how do you counter-propose from the Islamic dimension in terms of algorithm? Who are the Muslims who are writing this algorithm anyway that will replace the algorithm that we are now complaining that is going to sideline us? Yeah. And do not offer post-racial future, but rather one from which people of color are simply erased. Yeah. If that is not real enough, we just had a discussion in the Academy Science about this flower Rafflesia. I'm sure most of you know, the biggest flower. And this is supposed to be discovered by the West, although it is our local flower. But here there is one scientist who actually have worked on this and actually has given also their proposal to the Western sort of publication that looks in Rafflesia, but his paper was rejected. And he later on find out that the Rafflesia that he talked about was exactly what he proposes, but it was rejected because he said this: our so-called molecular biologists are mere technicians supplying algorithm. We have no part in developing and supplying materials to the Western scientists in return for being listed as co-author. To reach the top, we have to master theories, question concepts, provide explanation, and make sense, shape new theories, and compete for intellectual leadership. We cannot compete on the world stage because we suffer from a huge inferiority complex. Westerners in the West do not have such a complex. So I guess I will stop there. I think I would have laid out the issue that we are now at the risk of being colonized again to a different means, because we have got this complexity that believes everything comes from the West is the real truth, and we have no means to compete or to challenge them at any level at all. So on that note, I would like to stop. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Sorry if I missed the point, the topic altogether, but that's a concern that I've got, and I hope we can pay due attention to it. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Thank you.